Hey everyone, I'm Nicole, Senior Dev Advocate at the SDF. Last week I put out a video introducing oracles and how crucial they are to the functioning of smart contracts. Basically, a smart contract is just a piece of code that, in a lot of cases, can't really do anything until it gets access to data that informs that code and lets it execute. And when that data is off-chain and beyond the reach of the smart contract alone, an oracle is needed to bridge that access. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about oracles in this video, about the different types of oracles, and importantly about the biggest challenge facing oracle builders, which is known as the oracle problem. It sounds very ominous, I know. In the last video, I talked about a couple different types of oracles for my particular use case, which was, if you remember, the temperature bet that I had with my friend. So we had a bet about the maximum temperature in a given day, and for our contract to execute, it needed to know some temperature data. So our smart contract, in that case, could either use a software oracle that pulls data from a third-party web API, or a hardware oracle connected to an Internet of Things sensor that measures temperature, in this case, right there on the spot. So there are other types of oracles too. First, are cross-chain oracles, which essentially allow smart contracts to read and write data between blockchains. Maybe a smart contract needs to know if and when a transaction on another chain has occurred for it to execute its own terms. So cross-chain oracles enable this interoperability, which is the capability of different blockchain networks to communicate and share data or assets across one another. So suddenly, thanks to this cross-chain oracle, your smart contract built on one blockchain network can have access to one or multiple other blockchain networks. Then there are compute-enabled oracles, which have this additional capability of performing computations or even executing their own code on data that they retrieve before providing that data back to the smart contract. Compute-enabled oracles might even aggregate data from multiple sources, filter the data, or transform it according to some predefined rules, among other computations. So, to give you another example, maybe my friend and I make a new bet that takes into consideration the past year's worth of temperature data in New York City. We're really going to make, essentially an intuitive guess about how frequently we think the temperature got above, let's say, 25 degrees Celsius in that past year. So without doing any Googling, I'm going to just commit to 125 days. That is, I think the temperature in New York at some point during the day on any given day in the past year reached at least 25 degrees for 125 days. Any of those days from the past year. My friend, again, very prone to the dramatic, bets that the day count is going to be closer to 200 days where the temperature reached higher than 25 degrees. So we write all of these terms into a smart contract, again with the reward of $10. And then we're going to use a compute-enabled software oracle to access the Weather Channel's web API, which let's just presume has all of this data that I'm presuming it does in this example. And for good measure, we will also use a compute-enabled hardware oracle to access the IoT sensors that we've got installed outside our house. So we're just double-checking, want to make sure. Since the data requests are going to return 365 days worth of temperature data, we really need our compute-enabled oracle, or the two that we're using, to sort through that information ahead of time. It's not going to be the same as the previous example where we're just plugging in the maximum temperature value into our smart contract and seeing who was right. Really, I could have been right, my friend could have been right, or neither of us could have been right. And we would know that just from that one temperature value that we got from our oracle. In this case, we now need to know the total number of days above a certain temperature across all of those days, and that's a lot of data. So essentially, we ask our compute-enabled oracle to filter the data for only the days where the temperature went higher than 25 degrees, and then to count the number. And we'll ask it to return whatever that value is into our smart contract, which will then, in turn, have the value it needs to determine who has won this bet, if either of us. So those are the types of oracles, but oracles may also come with different levels of decentralization. Centralized oracles are controlled by a single entity. While these oracles can be efficient in some ways because they depend on only one source, they of course only depend on one source. So they don't benefit from the decentralization that a decentralized oracle would get, and therefore these centralized oracles constitute essentially a single point of failure. If the oracle goes offline, gets hacked, manipulated, or censored in some way, that's it. There's only one source, and now its data can be relied upon by the smart contract. The second level on this decentralization scale can be seen in consensus-based oracles. So these are oracles that use data from several other oracles. They aren't quite centralized because of the multiple sources, but they also aren't decentralized since they still might rely on an owner to essentially approve that consensus. But finally, there are decentralized oracles, which are, you guessed it, decentralized. So these oracles are made up of a network of oracle participants who all source and verify the data before it gets submitted back onto the blockchain and back to the initial requesting smart contract. And this level of oracle decentralization actually brings us to that oracle problem. Blockchains, as we know, are isolated and decentralized systems. They don't have access to other systems, of course, unless facilitated by oracles, but that's on purpose for security, trustlessness, immutability, among other reasons. So the question then for oracle builders is essentially this problem. How do you make sure when integrating an oracle into a blockchain network that the oracle providing off-chain access will retain the same security, trustlessness, immutability, and all the other values that are inherent in that decentralized system? There are a few immediate answers to this question. First, the data cannot be incorrect or inauthentic. It can't be wrong, and it has to come from a correct source. Second, the data must be intact, unaltered, and provided by the oracle without delays or interruptions. You can imagine the problem if I won the bet with my friend based on data that wasn't reliable. She would definitely want her money back and may no longer even trust the system, which entirely defeats the purpose of smart contracts on a blockchain. To that point, the data must also be trustless. It shouldn't rely on one centralized source that can be corrupted or hacked and therefore inherently can't be trusted. Okay, so how do we solve this problem? The leading oracles, first and foremost, do a good job of modeling their oracle mechanisms off of the blockchain itself. The oracle uses a decentralized collection of independent nodes that make up its network. These nodes are essentially the sourcers that respond to requests from the oracle for specific types of data. So when a smart contract requests data from the oracle, say the last year's worth of temperature data, the oracle network sends out a request to its nodes, who all then submit bids to be chosen to fulfill the request. And they're not just randomly selected, and this is very important. The oracle will closely examine any given competing node's track record, performance history, response time, overall reputation, and disqualify nodes that aren't reliable or reputable. The nodes that are then chosen will go off and do the work, collecting and submitting the data back to the network. And then the oracle will aggregate all of that data from all of the nodes for accuracy. It'll reconcile data, sometimes from multiple sources. And once that aggregation has been completed, all of the oracle nodes will sign off on the data, and it'll get submitted back to the original requesting smart contract. So there are a lot of mechanisms in place to make sure that the reputation of the sourcers and also the quality of the data is really high for any requesting smart contract data request that the oracle gets. Of course, there are still risks, as there always are. Even with this process in place, it can be difficult to manage and enforce data quality for off-chain data, since the decentralized nature of these oracles means that anyone can become a node operator and submit answers. But the incentives to submit good answers are strong, including not just payments, but also the risk of earning a negative reputation for submitting bad answers. And of course, the oracle has ideally the right mechanisms in place to enforce that reputation. So there you have a deeper dive into oracles, the types of oracles you might encounter, the varying levels of decentralization, and how leading oracles are tackling the oracle problem. Stay tuned for more content coming soon.